Hello and a hearty welcome to the students of class 9. Today we shall learn a poem from your English textbook, Beehive. It is poem number 5 and is titled A Legend of Northland by Phoebe Cary. A Legend of Northland by Phoebe Cary. Let's begin this poem with an introduction of the poetess. Phoebe Cary was an American poetess and the younger sister of poetess Alice Cary. She was born on 4th September 1822 in Ohio, US. Both Phoebe and Alice Cary co-published poems in 1849 and then went on to publish volumes of their own. After their deaths in 1871, joint anthologies of the sisters' unpublished poems were also compiled. Phoebe Cary died on 31st July 1871 in Newport. The central idea of this poem is true happiness lies in sharing things with the persons who are in need. If we are greedy, we cannot have happiness in our life. Also, if there is satisfaction in our life, peace is bound to follow. A Legend of Northland is a ballad. A ballad is a poem narrating a story. In this poem, there are 16 stanzas and each stanza comprises of 4 lines. Ballads are a part of folk culture or popular culture. Folk culture comprises of traditional stories which are passed on from one generation to the next generation. A Legend of the Northland. Here, legend means an old historical story which is passed on from one generation to another. Northland is an area which is near the North Pole. The exact place or country is not specified here, but Northland means the area or the country in the northernmost part of the earth, that is, near the North Pole. So children, which are the 2 poles of the earth? You must have learned that the earth has 2 poles, the North Pole and the South Pole. And do you know which countries lie around the North Pole? The countries like Finland, Denmark, Russia and Netherlands lie around the North Pole and may be called Northland. The poem, A Legend of Northland, narrates the legend or a story of an old lady who angered Saint Peter, who was a disciple or a follower of Jesus Christ. This was because she was very greedy. Because of her greed, she angered him. Let's now read the poem and enjoy it. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through, where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows, and the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it's true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Once when good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching, just as he did, you know, he came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. Therefore she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked, when she turned it over, as large as the first had done. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. For she said, my cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away. So she put them on the shelf. That good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. And he said, you are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter, and fire to keep you warm. Now you shall build as birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she had changed to a bird. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned, black as a coal in the flame. And every country schoolboy had seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. So children, let's now do the poem stanza-wise in order to understand the poem in detail. Away, away in the Northland, where the hours of the day are few, and the nights are so long in winter that they cannot sleep them through. In this stanza, the poet says, away, away, meaning far away in the Northland. Northland is a region around the North Pole or an area in the northernmost part of the earth. Here, the hours of the day are few, meaning the duration of the day is very less or short. And the nights are so long in winter. That means in winter, during winter season, the duration of the night is very long, that they cannot sleep them through. Here, they refers to the people who live in this region. The poet says that the duration of the night time is so long that the people cannot sleep through them. They cannot sleep throughout the night because the nights are so long. He wants to emphasize that the duration of the night is very long. Where they harness the swift reindeer to the sledges when it snows. Here harness means to tie. Swift, very fast. Reindeer, an animal found in the polar region, and sledge is a cart driven on ice. The Northland region experiences severe cold conditions. It's a snowy area. It is very cold and people cannot walk on the snow. Therefore, the people there tie the reindeer, this animal which is found there, to their sledges. It is a mode of transportation for them. And the children look like bears' cubs in their funny furry clothes. The poet adds that the children there look like young ones of a bear. Bears' cubs meaning the young ones of a bear, because they wear funny looking clothes made up of fur, which is like the furry skin of a bear. They tell them a curious story. I don't believe it is true, and yet you may learn a lesson if I tell the tale to you. Here, they refers to the parents or elders in this region, and them refers to the children or the younger generation. The elders of the Northland region tell a curious meaning strange story to the younger generation. The poet says that he does not think that the story is true, but if he tells the story, maybe the reader could learn a lesson from it. The story gives an important message. Once one good Saint Peter lived in the world below and walked about it preaching, just as he did, Saint Peter is a disciple or follower of Jesus Christ. Preaching is to give a religious talk. So the story is about Saint Peter when he used to live in the world and went around giving religious lectures to the people, just like all saints do. At that time, an incident occurred. He came to the door of a cottage in traveling round the earth, where a little woman was making cakes and baking them on the hearth. Cottage is a small house, and hearth is a fireplace where you do cooking. When St. Peter was moving around the world, giving religious lectures to the people, he reached the door of a cottage, a small house, where a small woman was making cakes. She was baking the cakes in the fireplace. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Here faint means very weak. Saint Peter was feeling very weak as he had not eaten for a long time. The day was almost done means it was evening time. As Saint Peter had not eaten anything the entire day, he was very hungry and was feeling weak. So he went to this woman who was baking cakes and he asked for one cake out of her many cakes she had. And being faint with fasting, for the day was almost done, he asked her from her store of cakes to give him a single one. Here faint is weak. So as Saint Peter had not eaten anything for the entire day, he was very hungry and was feeling weak. So he went to this woman who was baking cakes and he asked her for a single cake, one cake out of the many cakes she had baked from her store of cakes. So she made a very little cake, but as it baking lay, she looked at it and thought it seemed too large to give away. The woman was very selfish. she did not give a cake from her store. Instead, she started making a very small cake for Saint Peter. But when she put the cake for baking, she looked at it and thought that this cake was too big to be given to someone. So she did not want to share her food with anyone. Therefore, she needed another and still a smaller one, but it looked when she turned it over as large as the first had done. Here needed means to make dough from flour. Now the miserly woman thought that the cake was too big to be given away. So she started making another cake, which was very small in size. But whenever she took out a cake from the hearth, they appeared to be larger than the original size. Hence, she baked a very small cake for Saint Peter. Then she took a tiny scrap of dough and rolled it flat and baked it thin as a wafer, but she couldn't part with that. The third time she took a very small amount of dough and rolled it. The poet here says that she rolled and rolled to emphasize that she rolled the dough and made it very thin like a wafer and baked it. But she was so greedy that she could not give even that thin piece of bread to the saint. For she said, "My cakes that seem too small when I eat of them myself are yet too large to give away," so she put them on the shelf. The woman reasoned that when she ate the cakes, she felt that they were very small, but if she had to give them to someone, she felt that they were too big to be given away. So she put all the cakes on the shelf of her kitchen and did not give any cake to Saint Peter. Then good Saint Peter grew angry, for he was hungry and faint, and surely such a woman was enough to provoke a saint. Provoke means to incite someone, causing anger. Saint Peter became angry because he was very hungry. He was feeling very weak, and the selfish woman was not ready to give him even a small piece of cake. This behavior of the greedy woman angered the saint. And he said, "You are far too selfish to dwell in a human form, to have both food and shelter, and fire to keep you warm." Here dwell means to live. So Saint Peter in this stanza cursed the woman and said that she was very selfish and she did not deserve to live like a human being. He added that God had given her food, shelter, and fire to keep warm, but she had become selfish for all the resources she had. "Now you shall build as the birds do, and shall get your scanty food by boring and boring and boring all day in the hard dry wood." In this stanza, scanty food means very little food. Boring is to make a hole in the wood. Saint Peter cursed the woman that henceforth she would become a bird because she did not deserve the human form. She did not deserve to be a human being anymore. She shall become a bird, and just like birds build their houses and collect very little food by boring into the wood, similarly, she would also work hard in the dry wood all day and get very little food. Then up she went through the chimney, never speaking a word, and out of the top flew a woodpecker, for she was changed to a bird. Chimney is a vertical pipe which conducts smoke from a fire or furnace and typically through the roof of a building, as you can see in the picture. So as soon as Saint Peter cursed the woman, she did not get a chance to speak for herself, because that very moment she flew up to the roof through the chimney and flew out in the form of a bird. Saint Peter's curse had converted the woman into a bird. She had a scarlet cap on her head, and that was left the same, but all the rest of her clothes were burned, black as a coal in the flame. Here scarlet means bright red color. When the woman turned into a bird, at that time she was wearing a red-colored cap on her head. This cap was there on the bird's head also, but the woman's remaining clothes had burned and turned black in color, just like coal. And every country schoolboy has seen her in the wood, where she lives in the trees till this very day, boring and boring for food. Here countryside means village. Wood means forest. So all the small children who go to school, they have seen this woodpecker in the woods, in the forest, where she stays all day and keeps on digging the wood with her beak to collect her food. Whenever any child sees this kind of a bird, then the elders tell him this story. They say that the bird used to be a woman earlier. She was very greedy, and so she was cursed by Saint Peter and turned into a bird. The children get a teaching that they should not be greedy. In this poem, greed has no end. This is evident in the behavior of the old lady when she was asked for a small piece of cake by Saint Peter. She could not even give him a wafer-thin slice of cake, and this angered Saint Peter, and he cursed her to be a woodpecker. What we learn from this story is one should be always able to share things with others, because God has been very kind and has given us so much. A rhyme scheme is a pattern of rhymes at the end of each line of the poem. It is usually referred to by using letters A, B, C and so on to indicate which lines rhyme. The rhyme scheme of this poem, as you can see on the screen, is A, B, C, B. A literary device is a technique used by writers to produce a special effect in their writing. The example of a literary device is alliteration. Alliteration is a repetition of a consonant sound in two or more close words. For example, in stanza 1, that, they, them, through, the sound is repeated. Similarly, in stanza 2, they, the sound is repeated, and so on. The second literary device is repetition. That is, if any word or sentence is repeated to lay emphasis on it. Examples are, number 1, in stanza 1, away, away in the Northland. The word away is repeated. In stanza 9, and rolled it flat. The word rolled is repeated. In stanza 13, by boring and boring and boring, the word boring is repeated. And also in stanza 16, boring and boring for food, the word boring is repeated. These are examples of the literary device repetition. Literary device number 3 is simile, that is comparison using as or like. In stanza 2, the children look like bear's cubs. Here the children have been compared to bear's cubs. Therefore, this is an example of simile. In stanza 9, baked it thin as a wafer. Cake is compared to a wafer. And third example is in stanza 15. Clothes were burnt black as a coal. The color of the burnt clothes is compared to that of coal. So this is also an example of simile, which is a comparison between two things using as or like. Now children, let's discuss a few question and answers. Which country or countries do you think the Northland refers to? Answer: the Northland may refer to any extremely cold country in the Earth's polar or North Polar region. Question number 2. What did Saint Peter ask the old lady for, and what was the lady's reaction? Answer: Saint Peter asked the old lady for one of her baked cakes. The lady tried to bake a small cake for the saint. However, as the cake was baking, she noticed that it seemed too big to give away, so she needed a smaller dough. She found that this one is as big as the first one, so she took a really tiny piece of dough and rolled it thin as a wafer. But she could not part with it, and she put it on the shelf. Thus, at last, she did not give anything to Saint Peter. Number 3. How did he punish her? Answer: he punished the lady by changing her into a woodpecker that would have to build a nest to live in and gather scanty food all day long by boring into the hard dry wood. Number 4. How does the woodpecker get her food? Answer: the woodpecker gets its food by boring holes into the hard and dry woods of trees. Number 5. Do you think that the old lady would have been so ungenerous if she had known who Saint Peter really was? What would she have done then? Answer: no, The old lady would not have been so ungenerous if she had known who Saint Peter really was. Instead, she would have welcomed him in her house happily and given him several large cakes to please him and get his blessings. Coming to the last question, is this a true story? Which part of this poem do you feel is the most important? Answer: no, this is not a true story. It is a legend. I think the most important part of this poem is the one in which Saint Peter turns the old lady into a woodpecker to teach her a lesson. In this part, we get to learn the very important values of life that are generosity and helping others. We should appreciate all the comforts and luxuries we enjoy as human beings, and we should not be selfish. So children, here's a little assignment for you. Please write down the meanings of the new words you have studied in this poem. Also write down the question and answers of this poem in your class workbook. Hope you have understood the poem, children. Thank you and God bless.